We assume that the body we are born with is the one we are meant to keep. We assume that wholeness is the natural state of happiness. But for a man named Adam, his own body was a prison. And on a dark night in a lonely parking lot, he decided to break free. He sat quietly in the driver's seat, his heart pounding against his ribs, scanning the shadows. He didn't want anyone to intervene. He had been planning this moment for years. Taking a deep breath, Adam climbed into the back seat. He poured 50 pounds of dry ice, solid, freezing carbon dioxide, into a trash can. And then, with a terrifying resolve, he lowered his healthy left leg into the chemical fog. The cold seared his flesh like fire. It was agony. But the pain didn't deter him. In fact, as he frantically packed more and more ice around his limb, burying it in the freezing white smoke, he felt something else entirely. He knew his skin cells were freezing, bursting, and dying. He knew he was destroying himself. But what he felt was relief, a profound, overwhelming sense of accomplishment. He sat there in the freezing dark for 10 agonizing hours. He had thought of everything. He had even pre-installed hand controls in his car so he could drive himself to the emergency room without using his legs. As he finally turned the key and drove toward the hospital lights, he was sure of one thing. The damage was irreversible. This time, the doctors would have no choice. They would finally agree to amputate his leg. Adam was suffering from a rare, profound, and often misunderstood condition, Body Integrity Dysphoria, or BID. It compels otherwise physically healthy people to believe that a specific part of their body simply does not belong to them. The desire to correct this mistake is so intense that patients will go to extreme lengths, like Adam did, to amputate a limb or even sever their spinal cord to become paralyzed. But for decades, this condition wasn't seen as a neurological disorder. It was seen as a kink. The medical journey begins in the unlikeliest of places, the pages of Penthouse magazine. In the late 1970s, a sex researcher at Johns Hopkins University stumbled across a strange exposé on unusual erotic fantasies. Among the letters from anonymous contributors, he found something that stopped him cold. People were writing in, describing a burning desire not just to have sex with amputees, but to become amputees themselves. They described fantasies of having their own arms or legs removed. Intrigued, the researchers sensed there was something deeper at play than simple fantasy. He suspected a root psychological condition, and he decided to dig deeper. The researcher joined the team of Dr. John Money, a renowned and controversial professor of medical psychology at Johns Hopkins. Money had spent his career studying the fringes of human sexuality, and he was fascinated by this new phenomenon. He wanted to find people who were aroused by the idea of their own amputation. But the condition was so rare, he could only find 2 subjects. 2 middle-aged men had separately contacted the hospital, begging for a consultation. Their request was shocking. They wanted a surgeon to remove a perfectly healthy leg. The doctors, bound by the Hippocratic oath, "do no harm," refused immediately. To them, cutting off a healthy limb was unthinkable, a violation of everything they stood for. The men were disappointed, but not surprised. They had been denied many times before. But while the surgeons turned them away, the psychiatric department saw an opportunity. They referred the men to Dr. Money, and for the first time, someone was willing to listen to their story. The first subject, whom we'll call Ted, told a story that began in early childhood. When he was just 2 years old, a kitchen accident left his leg badly burned. The recovery took a year, during which he learned to navigate the world essentially on one leg. For most children, this would be a trauma. For Ted, it was an awakening. He realized he could function just fine without the limb. As he grew up, he would see amputees in public and feel a strange, profound sense of envy. He didn't pity them. He wanted to be them. With puberty, this envy morphed into desire. He began having intense sexual fantasies about losing his leg. Dr. Money, viewing everything through the lens of sexology, probed deeper into Ted's identity. And Ted revealed another layer of complexity. Though living as a man, Ted confessed to identifying as a woman, describing moments of visceral body dysphoria and self-loathing. To Dr. Money, this was a crucial clue. He began to form a theory that linked the desire for amputation with gender identity and sexual preference. Dr. Money, this was breaking. Money was a product of his time, and his conclusions were heavily colored by bias. When he learned that Ted was bisexual and transgender, he made a leap of logic. He assumed that Ted's identity was inherently linked to self-mutilation. He diagnosed Ted not with a neurological condition, but with a paraphilia, an extreme, dangerous sexual fetish. He believed that Ted's childhood trauma had hardwired his brain to eroticize the loss of a limb. He even coined a name for this new condition, apotemnophilia, from the Greek for love of cutting away. Today, we know that body integrity dysphoria is not a paraphilia. It is not simply a sexual fetish. But looking back, we can see why Money made this mistake. His subjects weren't content to just fantasize. Their desire was dangerous, radical, and persistent. They didn't just want to play at being amputees. They wanted the reality. They wanted the bone saw. For Ted, the feeling was visceral. He felt like he had a foreign object, an alien appendage strapped to his body. His leg didn't belong to him. It was an imposter, and he wanted it gone. After being rejected by every hospital he contacted, Ted's desperation reached a breaking point. He decided to do it himself. One afternoon, he sat down with a heavy hammer and a tapered metal rod. With terrifying force, he drove the metal spike directly into his own shin bone. But the injury wasn't enough. He needed it to be fatal to the limb. So he rubbed saliva and mucus into the open wound, deliberately trying to cultivate a massive infection. Days later, his leg turned a violent scarlet red. He had done it. He checked into the hospital, claiming it was a work accident, praying the doctors would finally amputate. But modern medicine worked against him. The doctors fought heroically to save the leg. They blasted him with antibiotics, cleaned the wound, and brought the infection under control. To his utter dismay, the leg was saved. He was trapped in his whole body once again. Ted wasn't suffering alone. The second subject, Daniel, told an eerily similar story. Born with a clubfoot that was surgically corrected in childhood, Daniel still carried the emotional scars. By age 11, he was fantasizing about losing the leg entirely. Like Ted, Daniel was repeatedly turned away by surgeons. But unlike Ted, he found something else, a community. Hidden in the personal ads of newspapers, he discovered a secret network of people who shared his dysphoria. It was an underground world where people traded support and dangerous advice. They shared methods for do-it-yourself amputations. Some suggested using a tourniquet to slowly starve the limb of blood until it died. Others discussed using heavy weights to crush the tissue, or packing the leg in dry ice to freeze it to death. Daniel listened to these horrific suggestions, but he couldn't bring himself to do them. It wasn't just fear of the pain. He craved something more than just the loss of the leg. He craved validation. He wanted a doctor to look him in the eye, acknowledge his pain was real, and agree to help him. Daniel argued passionately for his right to surgery. He compared his struggle to that of transgender individuals, asking why society accepted sex change operations or cosmetic surgery to meet social norms, but refused him the surgery he needed to feel whole. He demanded a legitimate medical path. But Dr. Money, blinded by his own biases, dismissed their pleas as the product of a sexual paraphilia. He categorized them, labeled them, and moved on. However, there was one member of Money's research team who listened differently. Dr. Greg Firth was a respected New York psychoanalyst. To the outside world, he was a dispassionate observer. But privately, he became a fierce, secret advocate for these patients. He understood their emotional turmoil in a way no one else could. He understood the desire so powerful it drove people to risk their lives. Because Dr. Greg Firth was living a double life. While he studied the condition by day, he secretly suffered from body integrity dysphoria himself. In 1986, Dr. Money received a letter that challenged everything he thought he knew. It was from a man named James, a member of the secret community. James wrote to correct the record. For many of them, this wasn't about sex. It was about survival. He told the story of a man named Simon. Simon felt no erotic connection to amputation. He simply felt that his leg was an error, a mistake he had to correct. Driven by a need to feel fulfilled, Simon took drastic action. He took a shotgun, aimed it at his own leg, and pulled the trigger. The wound was horrific, damaging the tissue so extensively that doctors had no choice but to amputate. And the aftermath? Simon felt no regret, no trauma, only immense relief. He told James he only wished he had done it sooner. James's letter was a plea. He described men and women who were laser-focused on the removal of a single limb, not for pleasure, but for peace. "If I could," he wrote, "I would allow them to realize their long-term dreams." Dr. Money, trapped by his own ego, ignored the evidence. He couldn't accept that the desire wasn't a fetish, but Dr. Greg Firth could not dismiss it, because he lived it.
Since the age of 4, Firth had been haunted by the feeling that his right leg did not belong to him. He knew exactly where it should end, just above the knee. The rest, the calf, the foot, felt like a foreign parasite. For 20 years, he kept this secret, terrified that his colleagues would label him disturbed and unfit to practice. But in the shadows, he became a leader. He quietly networked with the underground community, encouraging others to accept their desires, believing that if enough people spoke up, the medical world would eventually be forced to listen. But for Firth, talking wasn't enough anymore. He needed action. Firth tried to go the legitimate route, confiding in fellow doctors, but he was met with universal refusal. So, in 1996, at age 52, he made a daring move. While in San Diego, he found an ad for a physician named John Ronald Brown, operating just south of the border in Tijuana. Brown was infamous for performing underground gender confirmation surgeries, and he was known to do anything for a price. When Firth called, Brown didn't ask why. He didn't ask for a psychiatric evaluation. He simply quoted a price: $3,000 to remove the leg. Firth set the appointment. Then, he called his friend Philip Bondi, another man suffering from the same dysphoria. They had a pact. If one got the surgery, the other would follow. Bondi was ecstatic. In February 1997, Firth crossed the border to the Clínica Santa Isabel in Tijuana. It was a shabby, underground facility, but to Firth, it looked like heaven. After decades of waiting, he was finally one step closer to being whole. But the dream was shattered. When Firth explained his reasoning, Dr. Brown's assistant was so disgusted that he stormed out, refusing to participate. The surgery was canceled. It took over a year for Brown to find a replacement. This time, the price was higher: $10,000. Firth paid it, but on the cab ride back to the clinic, he had a sudden, chilling epiphany. The compulsion was gone. The reality of undergoing an illegal amputation in a Mexican basement suddenly felt terrifyingly unsafe. When he arrived and saw the assistant wielding a giant, crude blade, his decision was made. He was out, but the surgery was already paid for. So Firth proposed a solution. He offered his slot to his friend, Philip Bondi. Bondi didn't hesitate. He took Firth's place on the operating table, ready to begin the rest of his life. Bondi went under the knife. When he woke up, his leg was gone. Dr. Firth Brown handed him crutches and sedatives and sent him back to a hotel room in San Diego to recover. Firth stayed in the adjoining room, watching over his friend. At dinner, Bondi was ecstatic. He was finally free. But the joy was short-lived. Bondi revealed a horrific detail. The anesthesia hadn't worked properly. He had felt every stroke of the blade. As the hours passed, Bondi's condition deteriorated rapidly. The pain was unmanageable. The wound looked wrong. But Firth, paralyzed by fear of exposing the illegal surgery, didn't call for help. 2 mornings later, silence fell over Bondi's room. Firth knocked. No answer. He cracked the door open and was hit by a wall of stench. The stump had turned black. A sickly fluid soaked the sheets. Philip Bondi
was dead. The surgery that was supposed to give him a new life had ended it. The autopsy revealed a butchery. Dr. Brown hadn't left enough skin to cover the bone stump. He had stretched the flesh too tight, killing the cells and inviting a lethal infection, gas gangrene. The bacteria had released toxins into Bondi's blood, killing him swiftly and painfully. Dr. Brown, who hadn't held a valid medical license in years, was convicted of second-degree murder. The sensational trial dragged the secret community of apotomophiles into the harsh light of public scrutiny. The world was horrified. No one could understand why anyone would choose to cut off a healthy limb. But amidst the scandal and the stigma, there was a silver lining. The tragedy forced the medical community to finally take a closer look. In 2003, Dr. Michael First of Columbia University launched a landmark study to find the real cause. Dr. First surveyed 52 individuals, a sample size far larger than Money's. The results were clear. For the vast majority, the motivation was not sexual. 63% simply wanted to restore their true identity. Only 15% cited sexual arousal. Money was wrong. It wasn't a fetish. It was an identity crisis. To reflect this, Dr. First renamed the condition Body Integrity Identity Disorder, later shortened to Body Integrity Dysphoria. He also distinguished it from body dysmorphic disorder. Patients with dysmorphia think their body is ugly or defective. They feel shame. Patients with BID know their limb is healthy and beautiful. They just know it's extra. It's unnecessary. Dr. First argued that BID had far more in common with gender dysphoria. Just as a transgender person feels their physical sex doesn't match their gender identity, a BID patient feels their physical body plan doesn't match their internal map of self. Despite this new understanding, doctors faced an impossible ethical dilemma. The Hippocratic Oath demands they do no harm. Usually, causing pain, like resetting a broken bone, is justified for long-term health. But does amputating a healthy leg count as harm if it cures a lifelong psychological torture? Patients insist it makes them whole. Doctors argue it disables them. Caught in this deadlock, medicine turned to psychotherapy. But for BID patients, therapy is largely useless. You can't talk someone out of a neurological reality. This failure led researchers to suspect the root cause wasn't in the mind, but in the brain's hardware. In 2013, scientists at the University of Amsterdam decided to put this neurological theory to the test. The researchers hooked up subjects to brain scanners and stimulated their legs with paintbrushes. The results were illuminating. When they touched the unwanted limb, activity in the brain's premotor cortex dropped significantly. The premotor cortex is where the brain plans movement. It holds the blueprint of the body. Think of it like the floor plan of your house. You know every room. But imagine waking up one day to find a new, strange room attached to your home. You didn't build it. It doesn't belong. It feels wrong. You would want to demolish it.
This is what happens in the brain of a BID patient. The floor plan in their premotor cortex is missing a leg. So when they look down and see a leg attached to their body, the brain registers it as a foreign object, an intruder. The desire to amputate isn't madness. It's the brain trying to correct a mismatch between its map and reality. In 2016, further scans revealed another physical difference. Patients with BID had reduced gray matter in the very areas of the brain responsible for body ownership. This proved once and for all that the condition isn't just in their heads in a psychological sense. It is physically etched into the structure of their brains. Research is still ongoing, hampered by the rarity of the condition. But for the thousands of people worldwide who suffer in silence, these findings offer a glimmer of validation. Their desires may seem terrifyingly strange to us, but in the end, they aren't asking for mutilation. They are asking for the one thing most of us take for granted: the simple, profound feeling of being whole.